The Mousehole Cat. This is a very special story that I'm going to read for my wonderful granddaughter, Maisie. The book was written by Antonia Barber, and it was illustrated by Nicola, Bayley, and it's put out by Walker Books of London. I make no This is not my intellectual property. This belongs to somebody else. It says the story was inspired by the old Cornish legend of Tom Bocock. It is dedicated with affection to my neighbors and friends, the people and cats of Mousehole. This property belongs entirely to Mr. Barber, Ms. Barber, and Nicola Bayley. And now I'm going to read this story for my special granddaughter. Okay, Maisie, listen and look. At the far end of England, a land of rocks and moorland stretches itself out into a blue-green sea. Between its high headlands lie tiny sheltering harbors where the fishing boats hide when the winter storms are blowing. One of these harbors is so small that the entrance between the great stone breakwaters is so narrow that fishermen call it the Mousehole. The people who live in the cottages around the harbor grew fond of the name, and they call their village Mousehole to this day. They say it in the Cornish way, Mousehole, but you may say it as you choose. Once there lived in the village a cat whose name was Mouser. She had an old cottage with a window overlooking the harbor, an old rocking chair with patchwork cushions, and an old fisherman named Tom. And there's Tom the fisherman and Mousehole. Mouser had many kittens in her time, but they all had grown up and left home. Her eldest son kept the inn on the quayside. It was noisy and smoky, and his man had once spilled beer on Mouser's head as he was drawing a pint, so she didn't go back there very often. She's not happy. She had that liquid fall all over her. One of the daughters kept the shop on the corner. It was busy and crowded, and her lady had once stepped on Mouser's tail as she was weighing out some vegetables, so she didn't go there very often either. Sometimes Mouser felt that her children had not trained their people properly. There she is with her daughter. Oh, here's a picture of Tom, and look what he's doing. He's giving Mouser some milk. Cats like that. Her own pet, old Tom, was very well behaved. He never spilled the cream when he was filling her saucer. He always stoked the range to a beautiful golden glow. He rocked the rocking chair at just the right speed. He knew the exact spot behind her left ear where Mouser liked to be tickled. What was more, he never wasted his time drawing pints of beer or weighing out vegetables. When he was not looking after Mouser, he passed the day in the most useful way possible. He took his little boat through the narrow opening between the great breakwaters out into the blue-green sea and caught fish for Mouser's dinner. There's his boat. Mouser was very partial to a plate of fresh fish. In fact, she never ate anything else, but she liked a little variety. So on Mondays, they made morgy broth, Mouser's favorite fish stew. On Tuesday, they baked hake and topped it with golden mashed potatoes. On Wednesdays, they cooked kedgeree with delicious smoked ling. On Thursdays, they grilled fairmaids, a mouth-watering meal. On Fridays, they fried launces with a knob of butter and a squeeze of lemon. On Saturdays, they scoused scad with vinegar and onions. And on Sundays, they made stargazy pie with prime pilchards and pastry. All in all, Mouser's days passed very pleasantly. Look, there's Tom in the kitchen making all his fish dinners. Then one year there came a horrible winter. At the far end of England, the blue-green sea turned gray and black. The great storm cat is stirring, thought Mouser as she watched at her window. The wind whined like a wild thing about the high headlands. It came hunting the fishing boats in their hidden harbors. When the great storm cat is howling, thought Mouser, it is best to stay snug indoors by a friendly fire. The sea drew itself up into giant waves and flung itself against the great breakwaters. All along the coast of Cornwall, the stone walls stood the shock. Then the sea sucked up its strength again and roared right over them, sinking the sailing boats in their home havens. But it could not get into Mousehole. Mouser watched as the great storm cat clawed with his giant cat's paw through the gap in the harbor wall. But it was too small. He snarled and leapt up at the great breakwater under the lowering sky, but it was too high. The fishing boats sat safe as mice in their own mousehole, but they could not get out. See the claws on the paw of the great storm cat? And all those boats. And because the fishermen could not fish, there was no more food. They ate up the few vegetables that were left in their storm-racked gardens. They ate up the salted pilchards that were left in the cellars. Mouser hated vegetables, and the pilchards were too salty for her taste. Soon there was nothing left. The cats and their people grew very hungry. Mouser sat by her window, staring out at the storm, and thought longingly of morgy broth and stargazy pie. Every day the fishermen gathered on the quayside, and sometimes they would try to take a boat out through the Mousehole. But always the great storm cat lay in wait for them, and they were lucky to escape with their lives. There's Mouser looking out the window. Then at last, one evening, as old Tom sat with Mouser on his knee, she felt him take a deep sigh. "Mouser, my handsome," he said, for he was a courteous and well-spoken man. "Mouser, my handsome, it will soon be Christmas, and no man can stand by at Christmas and see the children starve. Someone must go fishing, come what may, and I think it must be me. It cannot be the young men, for they have wives and children and mothers to weep for them if they do not return. But my wife and mother and parents are dead long since, and my children are grown and gone." Mouser purred to tell him that she understood, for it was the same with her. "I shall go out tomorrow, Mouser, my handsome," said the old man, "and I shall not come back without a catch." Mouser purred louder to tell him that she would go with him, for he was only a man, she thought, and men were like mice in the paws of the great storm cat. And there they are, talking about what they're going to do tomorrow. Getting ready to go out and try and catch some fish so everybody can have dinner for Christmas. Besides, she knew that if he did not come back, she would not much care to live in her cottage without him. There would be no one to pour the cream or stoke the range or rock the rocking chair. There would be no one in all the world who knew just where she liked to be tickled behind her left ear. "Tomorrow night, Mouser, my handsome," he said, "we shall eat morgy broth, baked hake, ling and launces, fair maids, scoused scad, and stargazy pie." Then Mouser purred as if she would burst to tell him that she loved him more than any of these things. The next morning they set out very early before the others were waking. Before they went, Tom stoked up the old range and damped it down so that it would burn steadily until they returned. Then he hung a lamp in the window so that it would shine out across the harbor and light their way. As they reached the quayside, Mouser looked back through the wind and the rain and thought how warm and welcoming the window looked. Oh, look there. See how he put the light in the window? That's what's going to help him get home. Soon their little boat was crossing the harbor towards the Mousehole Gap, and the voice of the great storm cat rose all around them like a giant caterwauling. As she listened to his wailing, Mouser felt a sudden strange sadness for him. How lonely he must be, she thought, endlessly hunting the men mice in their deeps of darkness and never returning to the rosy glow of a red-hot range. And her kind heart was moved to comfort him. Many a tomcat had Mouser tamed in her time with the sweetness of her singing. Now she lifted her head and sang like a siren, joining her call with the cry of the great storm cat. And so it was that he was taken off guard as the little boat made the bid for freedom. Soothed by the sweetness of Mouser's serenade, the great storm cat paused in his prowling and pulled back his great cat's paw for a mere moment. Swiftly the little boat passed through the mouse hole and out into the open sea. Then the great storm cat played with them as a cat plays with a mouse. He would let them loose for a little as they fought their way towards the fishing grounds. Then down would come his giant cat's paw in a flurry of foam and water. But he did not yet strike to sink them, for that would have spoiled his sport. When they reached the fishing grounds, the sea was so rough that it was hard to put out the nets. "I fancy you must sing again, Mouser, my handsome," said Tom, "for your voice seems to soothe the sea like the sirens of old." So Mouser sang again, longer and louder than she had ever sung before. Indeed, old Tom was forced to block up his ears so that her siren song should not distract him from the business of fishing. And again the great storm cat paused in his play and sang with her until the nets were safely shot. You know when she's singing cat songs, right? Meow, meow. All day they fished in a seething sea. The waves were so high and the clouds so low that soon lost sight of the shore. And all the time the great storm cat played with the little boat, striking it and then loosing it, but never quite sinking it. And whenever his claws grew too sharp, Mouser would sing to him and soften the edges of his anger. As evening came down, they hauled in the nets. Into the belly of the boat tumbled ling and launces, scad, hake, and fair maids. Enough fish for a whole cauldron of morgy broth, enough pilchards for 100 stargazy pies. "Mouser, my handsome, we are all saved," said old Tom, "if we can but bring this haul home to harbor." But Mouser knew the great storm cat would strike when he saw them run for the shelter of the mouse hole. She knew that the game serves only to sharpen the appetite for the feast to follow. "It is his meal or mine," thought Mouser, as she looked at the floundering fish in the belly of the boat. Blue, green, and silver, they glistened in the grayness. It made her mouth water to look at them. See all the different kinds of fish there? I don't know what is scad or what stargazy pie looks like, but it must be very good. As she thought of the morgy broth murmuring on top of the range, the stargazy pie growing golden in the oven, Mouser began to purr, and her purring rose like a hymn to home above the noise of the great storm cat's howling. Such music had not reached the ears of the great storm cat since the dawn of time. For when do cats purr out in the wind and the darkness? Puzzled, he paused in his howling, bending his ear to catch the strange sound. It seemed to him that he had once heard such a song long before, when he was no more than a storm kitten. The great storm cat grew quiet. Gone was his hunger for hunting, for making his meal of the mice men. Only the pleasure of the purring remained. Then the great storm cat began to purr with Mouser, and as the soft sound grew, the winds waned and the waves weakened. There she is, purring away with the great storm cat. Night fell, and the little boat sailed back across the slackening sea. As they came in sight of home, a strange sight met their eyes. The whole village of Mousehole was shining with light and lanterns gleaming along both arms of the harbor. For when the people of Mousehole had woken to find old Tom's boat missing and a light left in the window, they knew he had gone out to find fish for them, or perish in the deep water. All day they had watched, and they waited, staring out into the cloud-racked sea, but they could see no sign of him. And when night fell, the women went home and set candles in all their windows, and every man lit his lantern and went down to the harbor walls. Look how pretty it is. All those people with lights in their windows and lanterns that they're holding up so that Tom can find his way home in the dark. There's the great storm cat, and she's looking mischievously down at the boat that Tom and Mouser are in. But look at all the people waiting for them and helping them see where to bring the little boat in. As they waited and watched, they saw that the wind was dying and that the sea was growing calm. The dark clouds lifted and a thin moon shone out between them. And in the light of the thin moon, they saw a small boat coming, and behind it came the smallest, tamest storm kitten of a wind. As old Tom and Mouser came through the Mousehole gap, a sudden breeze caught them, a tiny, playful cat's paw, like a gesture of farewell. Oh, look, everybody's cooking. Well, they're all figuring out ways to make a wonderful, wonderful dinner out of all those fish. Yum. There was a great deal of cooking in Mousehole that night. The people made a whole cauldron of morgy broth. They baked hake, cooked ketagary, grilled fair maids, fried launces, soused scad. They baked 100 stargazy pies. Then people and cats, they feasted together until the hunger was no more than a memory. And every year since that day, at the inn on the quayside, the people of Mousehole hold a fish feast on the night before Christmas Eve and raise their glasses to the memory of old Tom. And every year in the yard at the back of the inn, the cats of Mousehole gather and raise a great howling to the memory of old Mouser. And every year, folk come from all over Cornwall at Christmas time to see Mousehole light up with 1,000 lights, shining their message of hope and a safe haven to all those who pass in peril of the sea. Look at all the kitties. They're all singing. I hope you like the story, Maisie.